In this video I'm going to explain exactly what a differential lock is, why you might want one fitted to the rear axle, or why you might fit an aftermarket or a standard one to the front axle as I've done in my own Ranger, and I'm going to be using my TRX4 model to demonstrate. So to understand differentials and locking differentials, we've got to start with a basic setup like this, where we've got this shaft attached to that cog, turning this cog. And if I turn this shaft as if this would be turned by the engine, you can see both of the wheels turn at exactly the same speed. If I put this down and move it in a straight line, you can see that again, both wheels turn at the same speed. Now if I go around a corner, look what happens. Both wheels have to turn at the same speed, and neither of them are really turning because this wheel's forcing that one to turn at the same speed. So we'll try a slightly wider arc, and you can see it does kind of turn a bit, but either this wheel is skidding or that wheel is skidding, which is not a great way to go around a corner. So I'll do that again, as you can see. And if I just turn it around itself, you can see that that wheel is just skidding, whereas this one's rotating on itself. Now to solve this problem, we have something called a differential. So here's the differential in the middle. We're not going to worry about exactly what these gears and cogs are called. That's not important. The important is the magic effect. So we'll start from here, and we're going to turn this shaft, and you can see that initially it looks exactly the same as the original model. I turn this, both wheels turn at exactly the same speed, and if I place it here, it's the same. Okay, now here's where the magic happens. If I want to go around a corner, look at that. You can see that this wheel here turns freely compared to the inside wheel. And obviously that's way better to go around a corner, because then we don't get the wheels scuffing against each other and we can turn more tightly. So that's a huge advantage of a differential. It allows both wheels to be turned by the engine, yet at different speeds, so you can go around a corner easily. Now let's come to the disadvantage for four-wheel drives and indeed performance cars. So we're turning our wheels, and let's say that we've got one wheel in the air or with less traction. We're going to simulate that by putting that on the ground like so. Now if I turn it and put it on the ground, you can see that I'm still trying to, that wheel's still trying to go around. Okay, this one's in the air, it's not doing anything for us, but we're still trying to turn that wheel, still trying to move us forwards. Now if I take the differential and we do the same again, both wheels are turning, and now I put one wheel on the ground, you can see that this wheel is just spinning uselessly and that wheel is doing absolutely nothing, and that is the differential problem. Now when we have a differential lock, what we're doing in effect is converting this differential to that. We are negating the differential effect, so we are forcing both of these wheels to turn at exactly the same speed on this one exactly as it is there. Now what that means is that, of course, that when we have a wheel in the air, we're still powering or turning this wheel, we can move forwards, but it does mean that the turning circle is increased and those wheels will scuff. So when you engage your lockers, then you're going to reduce your maneuverability. So if we look at that, for example, that's the difference. So here's the problem with differentials represented diagrammatically. So the inside wheel travels less distance than the outside wheel. As you can see, that's a smaller circle than that one, which means that the inside wheel has to travel slower than that, yet they are connected to the same axle. So both wheels must be driven by the engine, and the solution is a differential, which I've represented in red there, which allows those two wheels to be driven at different speeds, yet go around a corner. Now there is a problem with differentials when we go off-road, and even indeed for performance car driving. You're going to see this vehicle in action, watch for front right and rear left to spin, and that's the differential problem which we're going to solve with differential locks. We're just demonstrating how the traction systems work. We're not trying to say how to drive a four-wheel drive effectively off-road. So driver's just going to edge forward. So you can see we've got diagonal wheels with little weight on them and therefore little grip. And just going to increase the revs now, and that's going to start to get that, look at those wheels being braked, and then the vehicle moves forwards. Now over here the same thing is going to happen, and you can see that those diagonal wheels are spinning. And we're just going to slowly increase the revs. Look at that right front wheel get braked. Bit more, and more revs, and the vehicle starts to move forwards. And keep more revs. There we go. Beautiful. And same thing again here. And you can see the brake traction control pulls it through. Okay, so what we're going to do now is take the hard line with the wheels in maximum ruts, but we've got cross-axle differential locks engaged front and rear. We're going to be able to go slowly, and look, there's going to be no wheel spin at all, just super slow, and see how controlled that is, and see just how slowly the cross-axle lockers allow the vehicle to go. So to demonstrate how differential locks work, I've got my TRX4 model here, one tech radio controls, forward, backward, left and right, and importantly it's also got front and rear differential locks. So if I pick the car up like this, you can see that these two wheels spin freely, and the reason for that is we've got an open differential at the front and the back, and that sends, if you like, all the drive to the wheel which is easiest to turn. Now if I activate the rear differential lock like that, you can see that this wheel doesn't turn because it's still an open differential, whereas these are now forced to turn at the same speed because we've locked that differential at the back like so. And if I flip the front one in, and you can see both differentials front and rear are now locked. So I'm going to unlock them, and then we're going to drive up the hill. Okay, so let's drive up the hill with open differentials. And as you can see, this wheel's spinning, that wheel's spinning, and we're going nowhere. What we really need is to get this wheel with some torque into it, and that wheel with some torque into it. So, show that again. What I'm going to do now is lock the rear differential, and that is going to force this wheel to turn the same wheel speed as that wheel, and because we've got a fair bit of traction on it, that should be enough to bring us up the hill. So let's try that. Now you can see what's happening there is that we do indeed have both these wheels turning. This wheel is is now providing traction, but it's actually slewing the car around, sending it offline a bit as the car is pivoting around this wheel, which is quite normal with rear differential locks. And now if I engage the front differential lock, let's see what difference that makes. You can see that we can just really easily crawl over it like that. Okay, so let's just put the rear locker in and try and drive up over that. So before we got to there, yeah, that's about as far as we can get. So let's just go back a bit and then just try a little bit more momentum. Doesn't work. You can see the car's being sent offline there, which is a problem when you want to come back. So we'll try again. And try once more. And we did it, but we're a bit offline. Now let's contrast that with twin lock. And you can see there we've got all four wheels spinning, so what we need to do there is just have a little bit more momentum, which we can do maybe by coming off here. There we go. And we're up over the top. Okay, no lockers, driving forwards until we stop. Okay, wheels spinning here, so we're going to engage the front locker now and just drive forwards at that. Then that gives us the traction, but as you can see, we're having to make quite a lot of steering movements in order to keep the car going where we want it to. can see the backs swirling around, but now I've got steering authority at the front. Now I'm going to put the rear in. There goes the rear. Not quite enough to bring us out. Let's try the front. The front brings us out, but we lose steering authority. Right, this is both lockers in. And that's the best of all. So some terms, and this does get a little messy, I apologise. So differential, that is the set of gears which allow two wheels and an axle to be driven at different speeds going around a corner. We also call it a diff for short. You'll hear people talk about my diff does this, my diff does the other. Now in the case of a front differential lock, we call that, well, literally a front differential lock, but also sometimes a front locker, which means a front differential lock. There's also a center differential lock, sometimes called a center lock. We're not really dealing with that in that video. I do have other videos where I explain what that is. And then we've got a rear differential lock, or rear axle locker, sometimes just called a rear locker for short. And an axle locker refers to the locker on either the rear or the front axle as distinct from the center, and that is a very important difference to make. Now, when we talk about a locker, typically that refers to the front or the rear, but typically not the center. I know it's confusing, and a diff lock could actually refer to any one of those three. So someone says, have you put your diff lock in? That might mean the center or the rear or the front. It's just confusing. You have to be clear about which locking differential you are talking about. And an open diff is one which doesn't have a lock at all, or you have a lock on it but you haven't engaged it. So just be really clear about which differential you mean and whether it's locked or not. Whilst I've represented this vehicle here with three differential locks, not all vehicles have three. Sometimes they have 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. It really just depends on the vehicle. This is how differential locks are typically activated. Normally there's a button similar to this one here, and you can see that there's a lock between the two rear wheels, and that indicates it's a rear locker as opposed to between the front wheels, and it will be a front locker or the center. Now when I press that button in, then you can see that we get the locker activation symbol there, and that's, see, it goes white then orange. Now white means you've commanded it, orange means it's actually locked in. Now that's the factory differential lock for the rear. Now I've got an aftermarket one for the front, and that's an air locker. So this switch here is connected up to the air compressor, so that goes on, and then that's a one-off. When I want to activate the air locker switch, I just press that down, and then that's activated, and then that's off. Now there's no dash light or anything else out to tell me, but because I can just feel that on and off, then that can easily tell me whether I've got the locker on or off, and I like that tactile feel. So which vehicles have lockers and standard equipment? So here's a non-exhaustive list. So Pajero Sport, all Rangers have it, even in the two-wheel drive high riders, Y62 Patrol. It's an option on most Land Rovers, Nissan Navara, and Ford Everest. It's standard there as well. Now, in the case of vehicles with front and rear, the Jeep Wrangler Rubicon has it. The standard Ramblers do not have a locker front or rear, although some diesel ones you could option the rear. See, it's complex, right? The Ranger Raptor has front and rear, as will the Super Duty, as distinct to the standard vehicles. The GWM PHEV Canon Alpha, front and rear. Ineos Trialmaster versions of the Grenadier and Quartermaster have front and rear, other versions do not. The Toyota 300 series in GR Sport only has front and rear, other versions do not, and the GWM 300 has front and rear. So basically not all variants of every vehicle have either front or rear. You do need to be very specific about checking which particular model you're talking about, and if you don't have it, some vehicles do have the aftermarket option for a front or a rear or both. Again, you're going to need to be very specific about your models and check. So here's an Everest demonstrating brake traction control with the rear and then front and rear lockers, and that's a contrast to the Prado, which is using only Toyota's excellent brake traction control, demonstrating if you've got that, you've got less need for lockers. Now, a common question is brake traction control and lockers. So the first question is it an advantage to have brake traction control working on the front axle here when the rear is locked up? The answer to that is very definitely yes, it is. If you don't have that, then sometimes it's actually better to disengage the rear locker and have brake traction control working across all four wheels as opposed to on the rear locker. It's not a case of one is always better than the other. You've got to decide which is best for the situation. I'll cover that another time. Do car makers design their cars so that when you've got the rear locker on, brake traction control works on the front axle? Sometimes is the answer. Some of the better ones do, some of the worst ones don't. Land Rovers are very, very good at having both engaged at the same time. Others tend not to be. So Ford, for example, on the PX Ranger disabled it on the front axle. With the PX2 onwards, they enabled it, but it's desensitized, so it does vary quite a bit. Now, is a rear locker always better than brake traction control? Definitely not. You're going to need to figure out which is best when. Typically, if you want to turn or you need traction across all four axles, brake traction control is to go. Very slow speed stuff, high traction, typically you might use your rear locker. Now, if you have a vehicle which doesn't have a locker but has brake traction control and you fit an aftermarket one, will brake traction control work on the front axle? And the answer to that is yes. Will it work on the rear axle? No, it will never get enabled, because brake traction control looks for a difference in wheel speed from left to right wheels, and when it finds that difference in wheel speed, it activates. Now with a locker, those wheels will always turn at exactly the same speed, therefore brake traction control will not activate on the rear axle, but it should on the front axle. I had a Defender on which that worked quite nicely. Now, lockers and descents, they actually help you descending. I have a whole video as to how that works and why that is, but essentially rear, front or even both will help mostly in rocky rutted descents, not in slippery conditions. Hill descent control is a great thing. Typically though, manufacturers often disable hill descent control if lockers are in, or vice versa. It would be really nice to have both, and some vehicles like the latest Ranger do have that option as well, so then you can have both at the same time or one or the other depending on the condition. But again, watch that video for details. So which terrains do lockers generally help in? Well, they generally help with wheel lift terrains and climbs. That's their sweet spot. Things like rocky climbs, ruts, scallop sand dunes, when you're going up a dune, people have dug it out. Forest, alpine driving generally, that's when you want them. And the slower you go, the more likely you are to benefit from a locker, real crawl speed stuff there. And if you're towing, because towing puts more stress on the vehicle, requires a greater capability, lockers are often a good thing to have there as well. Now, where they don't help so much, that's where you might need to turn or you're on side angles, and also when you're going relatively fast as well. So general sand driving, I wouldn't use them in. If you're turning, a locker will actually send you wide and that will sap your momentum, and that's not what you want. Icy roads where there's a good base underneath, again, you wouldn't be using them there. Thin slippery mud on flat ground, again, they're not going to help, they're just going to create drag, and where you can reasonably safely use momentum, the faster you go, the less need you have for lockers. This is the turning circle with open differentials. And now if we're locked the rear differential only, this is what happens. Take a look at that back axle. And now if I lock both differentials, front is locked as well now. So should you fit lockers? Well, let's take a look at some of the pros. So you get a significant increase in off-road capability. It's probably the thing you can do if you don't have them to add lockers to your vehicle. You can either use that to do harder obstacles or the same obstacles and turn a hard track into a medium or medium into an easy. And if you've got a novice or uncertain driver, having a twin lock vehicle just crawl up there and you just less need to pick a line, etc., just less skill required, that can be a bonus for many people. And there's improved control on descents as well, and there's really no negative side effects with the manually operated lockers. I'm not talking about the auto lockers, not going to cover them in this video. The handling, everything else is the same. Now, disadvantages cost $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 depending on which one you get, your vehicle and the model of locker. Weight maybe 5 or 6 kilograms per axle, so there's something there. And you need to take care when you're driving. So particularly on the front axle, you shouldn't be going hard, maximum throttle, when maximum suspension compression and steering lock full left or right. So you've got to take some care there. So ideally what you want is completely selectable lockers, so you can select front or rear or front or both in high range and low range, and that just gives you the maximum flexibility. I don't like it when it's restricted to low range only, and typically rear then front. There's engineering reasons to do that to protect the drivetrain, but it does remove some flexibility as a driver. Typically you'd want front only, where you need to pull the vehicle forwards yet maintain traction for lateral stability on the rear to avoid it sliding into a ditch or something like that. So this is a real life hill I found. Top left, I'm driving with the rear locker only, very slowly. Top right, I'm driving with the rear locker fast enough to get up the hill. And at the bottom, I'm driving twin locked, as you can see, very slowly and still able to crawl up. And that's really the advantage of twin locked. You can just go slowly in conditions like this. Now, if you've got really good brake traction control, you probably don't need lockers so much. So here's an Lexus LX. In one situation, bottom right, it's got the rear locker in. In top left, it's just got auto mode, centre diff lock, brake traction control only. And you can see that there's no real difference between the two. The car's being driven at a fractionally different speed, but both an incredibly slow progress up there, very controlled. No real wheel spin, no real difference at all. So in that situation, you don't really need one. Now, here's the Lexus again in its auto mode, but I put it up against a Ford Ranger Raptor with its more basic traction control, and you can see what a difference there is there. So the Ranger would benefit more from a front locker than the Lexus would, because its brake traction control just isn't anywhere near as good. The Ranger does have a rear locker, but we didn't use it on that occasion for the comparison. Okay, so some use cases here. Let's say that you've got a vehicle with no lockers and it's either got no or poor brake traction control. So Isuzu, Patrol GU, yeah, a rear would make a huge difference then, particularly if you're in your sort of terrain that you're going to really use it, like rocky climbs. Then if you've got no lockers but really good brake traction control, that's LC200, LC300, pretty much any Toyota, really good for that. It would give you another option, but honestly it's not really required. Toyota, Land Rover are so good with their electronic traction control, now brake traction control, the need for lockers is almost negated. Rear locker, so you've got a rear locker and add a front, so that's Fords, Mitsubishi, etc. Should you add that front? Well, yes, if you're going to do a lot of towing off-road, it would definitely help there. And if you want maximum capability, but it's not essential, you'll still get to all the places as a touring four-wheel drive. But as you can see in my video, it just does it easier with a front locker. So here's a rocky climb, one of the best uses for lockers, and I'm just going to use the rear, and as you can see the vehicle pivots around the front right wheel, and I'm not going to get up there unless I hit it with momentum. And here's another example. Look, you can see the front right wheel isn't turning at all, and all other three wheels are spinning and it's not really going anywhere. Now I've disconnected the rear locker, I'm only going to use the front locker, and you can see the difference this makes now. Now the reason I'm only using the front is A, for demonstration, but B, I don't want the rear to slew, right? I want all the traction on the rear wheels to be for keeping the vehicle stable, and as you can see, just the front locker in comes up with absolutely no problem whatsoever. And let's take a look at that. I'll just go back a bit, and this is front locker only, and you can see that the front right wheel is doing all the work. It's not The car's got plenty of traction, it's just finding the wheel with traction, and that's what lockers are good at. It's not like a slippery situation where all four wheels are going to be spinning. If one wheel can pull you through, the locker can help. Now this is what it's like when you drive with brake traction control only, and here you can see you need momentum, and range is not very good at brake traction control. A Toyota would do this much better, but you can see just how high risk and how much momentum that you've got to put in there and launch the vehicle over. Finally, should you factory option a locker if you're buying a new vehicle? Definitely yes. If the manufacturer gives you the option, tick it, and then it's just built in, and then you have the warranty as well. Now, you may decide not to do that in some cases where it's very restrictive as to how you can use the locker. You might want, because an aftermarket one, you can put it high range, low range, two-wheel drive, whatever you want there. So that's the only reason you wouldn't tick it for a manufacturer, but generally I would tick that box. Now, if you're going to have just one locker, front or rear, so in the rear, the advantage is the differential is strongest in the back, and a differential lock will put more stress through the diff, so that's what you want. It will give you the best traction going uphill, and it will have the least effect on turning as well, which is important, and it's more frequently available for the rear than the front. Now, the front advantage is if you've got a really strong limited slip diff or something in the back, then the front can help balance that, so then you're adding traction to a wheel which didn't have it, and it will help pull through the situations where a front locker only is superior to a rear locker. It is a bit of a campfire debate. I would say just go for a rear if you're only going to have one, but if you're going to get one, ideally get two. So have you found this video useful? Any questions, please drop them in the comments. And finally, a little clip to show you that twin lockers do not compensate for choosing a poor driving line.